Alrighty, so let's get into it. So yeah, you look at the top 3 edge rushers in this draft: Jared Verse, Dallas Turner, and Laiatu Latu. All 3 of those guys, I think where they're ranked is pretty accurate in regards to their skill set, because they're guys who each of them have probably 2 or 3 really good to elite traits. Like with Dallas Turner, his speed to power is really good. Jared Verse, his speed to power is really good, borderline elite. Laiatu Latu, his ability to disengage, get off of blocks when he needs to is really good, and his feel for just rushing the passer is really good. So all 3 of these guys have really good traits. Some even borderline elite and arguably elite traits. So these are 3 guys worthy of top 10 picks, but they're not they don't really have enough elite traits to really categorize them as Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, Von Miller, Jadeveon Clowney. I know Clowney didn't really work. Maybe that's not the best example, but Clowney had some freakish traits. I mean, because the dude was a dominant physical freak in college. So even though there's a lot of really good traits, there's not enough elite traits that they should be surefire top 3 picks, but they certainly should be in discussion to go top 15, top 20, and then certainly a case to go top 10. Dallas Turner, I think 8 to Atlanta. I think Dallas Turner being a top 8 pick, I think that I think that's exactly where he should be. I'll just say that, because you look at Dallas Turner and you go, this guy, I think he's a guy that is just kind of scratching the surface. Still a young guy, 3-year, a true junior in Alabama, a guy that's just scratching the surface of his skill set. I think he's got even more room to grow. And yeah, his speed to power is legit. Like I talked about before, this guy just bursts off the line of scrimmage so fast. That's why his pass rushing moves are so effective. And yeah, dude's just a beast. I mean, he was a problem for many teams, gave Georgia a lot of problems. Got a ripped, strong, muscular body too. You saw at the combine 4.47. That's just so valuable, because the NFL becoming more of a space game. You need a guy that can rally to the ball, make tackles. So Dallas Turner just really is going to bring that aspect, and going to bring that aspect to the NFL just to pursue like that. But yeah, Dallas Turner to Atlanta, that'd be a huge get for Atlanta, and they could really use him well. And you talk, Atlanta's a team that's trying to become a more well-rounded football team. Getting an edge rusher really clears up a lot of issues. It's kind of like we talk about edge rusher, left tackle, quarterback, 3 of the most valuable, or quarterback, left tackle, edge rusher, and cornerback, probably the 4 most valuable positions in the NFL. You look at the Atlanta Falcons, they got good players at positions that are not as premium. Like you look at, they got Bijan Robinson at running back, Drake London at wide receiver. They do have AJ Terrell. They do have a shutdown corner, but you add a elite, or at least a very good edge rusher at the moment, with a guy that maybe 2-3 years down the road could be an elite edge rusher. I think that is really big for the Atlanta Falcons. I think the Arizona Cardinals are in a good spot as well. I mean, you look at pick 4 and pick 11. Like if Arizona came out of this draft with Marvin Harrison, Jared Verse, I think the alarm bells would really be sounding that Arizona could make some noise next season. Like that is just 2 really good picks right there. But now they have to go out and get that done, because Marvin Harrison could go higher than that, Jared Verse could go higher than that, but adding those 2 guys, and I saw that in one mock draft, I'm thinking like, that's exactly what Arizona needs to really get things back in the right direction. Because Arizona is just, they're in kind of like a position where they're not a bad football team, but they are on kind of the brink of maybe becoming a dumpster fire. But yeah, with Marvin Harrison and Jared Verse, like you can count on that this would not be a bad football team. Maybe they're like Minnesota next year, or who's another average team? They might be like the Vikings next year, maybe a 7-8, make an average ball club. But I think they'd show great improvement, because last year's draft, not bad. It took Michael Wilson, the receiver from Stanford. Paris Johnson was their first round pick last year. So I mean, not a bad draft for the Cardinals last year. But a couple picks like that to anchor this year's draft, and you're saying, Arizona, really, it's another step in the right direction for them. But yeah, I'm going to keep talking about, I think New England Patriots should take Marvin Harrison. The goal of the NFL draft is always to take the best possible players. Marvin Harrison's the best player in this draft. Plain and simple, or at least arguably, I'd say, arguably the best player in this draft. I have him as the number 2 player in this draft, so I'll kind of retract that statement a little bit, but I think Marvin Harrison is just going to be, he is going to be so key to the New England Patriots. Or potentially if they draft him. I mean, you look at, like, that's the thing, like, New England, like, I know there's New England Patriots fans saying trade back, but the thing is, like, if you trade back, say you trade back and acquire what? Another pick? 2 more players? Like, that's the thing with one elite player is worth how many good players? Like, Marvin Harrison, like, his floor could be Julio Jones. Like, a player like that is worth what? Like, at least 3 good players, 4 good players. It might even be worth 2 very good players. Like, just a drafting an elite football player. Now, obviously, we can sit where that's purely projection at this point. But drafting an elite football player is just such a critical point. It's such a critical part of a football team. Like, you look at the Dallas Cowboys. Like, people forget the Dallas Cowboys were teetering on the brink of becoming a poor football team. And they draft Micah Parsons, and suddenly all their defensive woes kind of shift. That is the pop. Now, granted, wide receiver is not as valuable position as Micah Parsons, like just a freak linebacker who can rush the passer. I get that. But, like, getting an elite difference maker, I don't care what, not even in the NFL, what level of football, college, high school, middle school, elementary playground, getting an elite difference maker is just such a game changer. And it's just like, it's like a couple years ago with the Browns. I mean, the Browns, after the playoff year, they weren't very good, but they still had Myles Garrett. Or you look at, like, even if the 49ers take a step back here in a couple years, like, Nick Bosa's not going anywhere. Like, just having one elite player, obviously, I'll reiterate again, an edge rusher, a little bit more valuable position than wide receiver, but just like an elite football player is so important. And just, like, if you just think about it, and think about it, like, from a logical, think about, like, it from a lot, like, think about if a 10-year-old was drafting. Bear with me here. Like if hypothetically they're on the board at 3 or if they're on the clock at 3 and Marvin Harrison's on the board, say you even had a 10-year-old GM drafting. Logically, and then if someone makes a statement after the draft, or if someone makes a statement or if they trade back and someone makes a statement, hey, you guys were picking at 3 and you guys traded back with Marvin Harrison on the board. Why'd you do that? Or I guess I should put it this way. The Patriots traded back and they got some good players. And they're like, yeah, we got some good players, but we passed on Marvin. We did not take Marvin Harrison when he was on the board. Just like, if you think about that from a logical perspective, going back to, I guess, whether you have a Hall of Fame GM, a 10-year-old GM, if you just listen to that statement, we traded back when Marvin Harrison was on the board. If you listen to that statement, it just sounds kind of crazy. So I'm going to continue. I'm going to die on that hill that the New England Patriots should take Marvin Harrison. Obviously, they still could do it, but it's sounding like, I don't know. I guess everything is all purely projection, but it's sounding like they might not do it. So yeah, J.J. McCarthy, one of the wild cards in this NFL draft. McCarthy just, simply put, with J.J. McCarthy, this guy's just a winner. I mean, you look at in high school, won a lot of games in high school, won a lot of games in Michigan. He's got a good thing going with the meditation he does too. And yeah, J.J. McCarthy, it's kind of like I touched the last episode. J.J. McCarthy's a polarizing football player. Like, he's going to get people excited. He's going to get eyes watching him. And to me, it's always fun to watch. It's why people enjoy movies, because they like to see they like to see the conflict, the main character go through conflict and struggle. You look at J.J. McCarthy, a lot of his career, with the exception of some things in high school, a lot of his career has been pretty smooth sailing. And for guys like that, the NFL is kind of like, this is kind of it's going to be a fun test watching J.J. McCarthy in the NFL, because it's kind of like with Trevor Lawrence. It's like, okay, he played at a big time program, won a national championship. Now he's taking on the challenge of the NFL week in and week out grind. So how he performs during this test, not only in year one but throughout his career, it's going to be fun. And I kind of just keep picturing him in a Minnesota Vikings uniform. Obviously, it's to be determined, but yeah, Minnesota, one of the likely landing spots for McCarthy. So yeah, let's talk the edge rushers. So yeah, Jared Verse is a beast, and I really had to go back because I wasn't as high on Jared Verse at first, but then I go back and I watched some more, and just like the play he had against, I think it was Louisville or NC State, where he just completely pushed back that offensive tackle. That's when I knew, that's when I was like, man, this guy has some legitimate power. If you can do that in college, that'll translate in the NFL. You can still threaten offensive. You'll be able to threaten offensive linemen in the NFL. Like there's plays in Jared Verse's tape where he just, like, teams this year, they helped with the guard, with running backs, tight ends. They did a lot of different things to try to slow him down. But that's, to me though, the season Jared Verse had is not indicative of his talent. And what I mean by that, like, he's a guy who can still get to the quarterback when he is being double teamed, chipped by tight ends and running backs. But he's not a guy where he's not, like, agility and lateral movement is kind of what lacks in his game a little bit. So the double teams, I think, affected him. Knowing that, I think that's why the double teams affected him more so, because he's not, like, you can't overpower two guys. So I think with the double teams happening, that's what kind of caused Jared Verse to not really, or that's what caused his dip in production. But I still think Jared, like in the NFL, he can't be double teamed every play. Jared Verse, you saw, even like in the LSU game when he went against Will Campbell, he can win one-on-one. And against Will Campbell might be a legitimate top three pick next year, and the number one offensive tackle off the board. So yeah, Jared Verse is a very bright future ahead of him. This guy has legitimate power. Do not underestimate the power this guy, the speed to power this guy has, and just the strength in the upper body, just strength at the point of attack too. You can tell he has a feel for how to attack offensive linemen, with not just with speed to power, but he understands kind of like when the offensive, like he just kind of has a natural feel for when the offensive lineman's off balance. And he is pretty solid against the run. I don't think that's not necessarily his strong suit. He's a solid tackler. He's not the best tackler either, but yet I think one team's really just going to like Jared Verse, because they're going to understand that if you want to talk about rushing the passer and just pure speed, strength, explosion, and just giving, and just like really ability to threaten offensive tackles on every play, that's Jared Verse is your guy. So I think if you're looking for a true pass rusher, hand in the dirt pass rusher, Jared Verse is your guy. And then with Dallas Turner, he's more of hand in the ground, or he can rush the passer at a very high level, but he will also show some coverage ability, can move laterally pretty well, and has got some agility and bend as well. That's the thing with Verse, not as agile and not as bendy. I think that's why Verse, you talk about like Verse should have stayed in school. I think that's why he should have stayed in school, because you look at last year there was there's no edge rusher really last year that had the explosive power that that Jared Verse had. Now this year, like Dallas Turner, Laiatu Latu, even Darius Robinson is close, maybe on par. I'd say probably a little less than. But yeah, there's a couple guys. You could argue Dallas Turner, Laiatu Latu, and maybe one or two other guys that have speed to power that's on par. But actually, I would say maybe just Dallas. I would say just Dallas Turner does. But I would argue that Laiatu Latu is just a better. You could argue he's a better player. I have Jared Verse higher. That's kind of a toss-up right now. I got Dallas Turner 1, Laiatu Latu 2, and then Jared Verse 3. But yeah, really strong edge rusher class. I do like Chop Robinson too. Chop Robinson has got kind of like Dallas Turner. He's got good bend, can really get around the edge, gets off the line of scrimmage quickly so he can really threaten with pass rush moves in a hurry. And yeah, Chop Robinson kind of seen as that consensus number 4 guy, actually. And I've kind of pushed back on Braylon Trice a little bit. I had to kind of reevaluate. I do like Braylon Trice. He does have legitimate strength. I think Trice is one of those guys. I think he'll go second round, and I think his career is going to be a guy who is just a really solid starter. Like I think he'll be a guy someone takes in the second round, and it's kind of like the person that whatever you purchase, whether it's I don't even know, like it's like when you I'm trying to think of a good example. You know, Braylon Trice is one of those guys that when you just make a solid purchase. Like say you buy it, I don't know, I'm into grilling. Say you buy just maybe not buy a premium grill, but you buy a good, reliable grill, like a Weber. Like my dad and I have, you buy just a good quality grill. Like, you know that maybe you're not going to be able to cook like top end level meat, but you know you're just going to get a good grilling steak. You know you're going to get a good solid grill. That's, I guess comparing Braylon Trice to grills, but he's just going to be a solid start in the NFL. And I think second round where he'll go, and I think a lot of teams will be, they're not going to be like this guy. I think asking him to become an elite pass rusher, I think is a stretch, but like, is he a guy that could play, 8 to 10 years with one team and just be a really good starter? I think that's a reasonable expectation for Braylon Trice. But yeah, the linebacker class lacking a little bit this year. I do like Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. Junior Colson, another good linebacker out of Michigan. Jeremiah Trotter out of Clemson, kind of an old school guy. I really like him too. But yeah, the tight end position, if you look at the tight end position, I don't think it's as deep as the past couple of years, but like especially 2 years ago, that was not the strongest tight end class. But you look this year, the top 3 guys, there's things to like in the top 3 guys, especially in Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is an elite football player. But yeah, Jatavion Sanders, good all-around tight end. I think that's kind of the best way to sum him up. He's a guy that his blocking ability, you look at tight ends, you don't always want to get into the blocking ability, but Jatavion Sanders certainly is a guy that is a pretty good blocker, and also, Cade Stover, good all-around tight end too. So yeah, it's a good, strong, as far as the top guys, it's a solid tight end class. But yeah, I think Byron Murphy has a legit case to go top 10. He is Byron Murphy was, you talk about, he was just a kind of like Laiatu Latu. You get the feel like he's just a problem for opposing offensive linemen. That's kind of the feel I got with Byron Murphy. You just got the feel like he was just offensive lineman knew it was going to be a long day when you're going against this guy. And the defensive tackle market, there's a need for defensive tackles in the NFL. So Byron, don't be surprised if this guy goes top 10. You're kind of thinking the main question, like when you make that statement, the main question comes to mind is what team's going to take him in the top 10. But like every team really needs a defensive tackle. Even the New York Giants, they have one of the best in the league in Dexter Lawrence, or the other New York team, the New York Jets, have a good one in Quinn Williams. But you could always, like, they don't have another, like, you can play two defensive tackles, and that's the thing that I think the New York Jets would be a really strong landing spot for Byron Murphy. Like him and Quinnen Williams inside, that is a serious problem. I mean, two guys that are just very tough to block one-on-one, have explosive power. I would argue that Byron Murphy may even get off the line of scrimmage better than Quinnen Williams. So yeah, I think that both those guys together, I think that would be a deadly duo. I think that would be a really strong pick for the New York Jets. It seems like a lot of people have the Tennessee Titans penciled in, taking an offensive lineman. Seems like Joe Alt, too. I like Joe Alt a lot. It's interesting people have him as the consensus number one offensive tackle. Like, is he deserving of that? Yes. But also, like, I think J.C. Latham, Olu Fashanu, Fuaga from Oregon State, you could argue, is he a guard tackle? Same could be said about Troy Fontenot. Is he a guard? Is he a tackle? But I think those guys are really good. I guess I'm going to have to reevaluate, watch their tapes some more, because, I've been making too many claims before really diving deep into tape. For a lot of these top guys, I've watched at least one game, highlights, at least one game of all 22 and highlights, and then some of these guys I've watched in the summer. But I think to just really say Joe Alt is the consensus number one offensive tackle, and not everyone's doing this, but just about every mock draft, he's the number one offensive tackle, or he's the first offensive tackle off the board. I think to make that claim, I don't think you can make that claim legitimately. It's kind of like with Marvin Harrison, the wide receiver. Or that's kind of the opposite case. I think you can make that claim that Marvin Harrison's the best wide receiver in the NFL draft. I think making that claim that Joe Alt's the best offensive tackle, I think that making that claim, I think, is going to gets a little bit more pushback. But yeah, offensive lineman, such a premium position. I mean, you look at Seattle, had a lot of woes on the offensive line for years. It seems like they're starting to kind of solve those issues. They got bookend tackles in the draft a couple years ago, and then they've improved and got stronger on the interior. But yeah, I mean, and then Arizona last year, taking Paris Johnson. I think more teams are starting to understand the value of the offensive line position. Like, you look at a lot of the top teams in the NFL, the Philadelphia Eagles, the San Francisco 49ers, a lot of the top teams in the NFL really have strong offensive line. I mean, the Detroit Lions, a lot of the best NFL teams have strong offensive lines. The Dallas Cowboys, their offensive line's taken a step back, but you look at a few years ago, their offensive line was really strong. So yeah, how many offensive tackles will go in the first round is a question. I think it's safe to say that there's going to be at least three. I would say probably four taken. Probably Fuaga, Latham, Alt, and Fashanu probably would be the four guys, I think. But Troy Fontenot may also go too. I think there could easily be five taken. So I think it's safe to say there'll be four offensive linemen total taken in the first round, arguably five. So, but yeah, the offensive line it's not as fun position to talk about. Like, you look at the NFL draft in years past, sometimes NFL teams don't really watch, or fans don't really watch the offensive lineman too much. So you'll see like an offensive lineman be taken, and then people just don't really react. People don't really like say a whole lot, or people are kind of like, yeah. But just because people just don't really watch offensive linemen too much, or they don't. I mean, it's hard with offensive linemen because you have to truly dive deep. And you have to truly dive deep and focus in on all 22 tape. And not everyone has access to that. And then you have to kind of dive deep into like camera. You have to dive deep into broadcast footage. And sometimes it's kind of hard to see. Sometimes you don't always have the best angle to see really the off, see how they get in their pass sets, see how they react to top end pass rushers, how they react to counter moves, how they react to just pass rush moves in general. But yeah, I think the next question is how many quarterbacks go in the first round. I think it's safe to be said that there'll be 4 quarterbacks taken in the first round. There may be 4 in the top 5, which is kind of crazy. And yeah, J.J. McCarthy may go top 5 too. You might have 3 in a row, then you might have McCarthy. You might have 4 in a row, but then you might have 4 of the top 5 picks. Like McCarthy may go at the 5th spot. So yeah, certainly could have 5 quarterbacks go in. Or 4 quarterbacks go in the top 5 picks. You may have 3 in a row with Williams 1, Daniels 2, and then Drake May 3. I think, and then the other question is, back to the tight end discussion. Do we have 2 tight ends taken in the first round? It's a interesting question. In that, like, Jatavian Sanders should be the second tight end off the board. I don't know if he will. And then what's interesting with Brock Bowers, it seemed at one point Brock Bowers was a surefire top 5 pick, arguably top 3-4 pick. Now in mock drafts, you see him going like 12 to 15. My question, a couple questions I'd have with that, like, does the injury have factor into that? Are the NFL people not as high on Brock Bowers as the media? Or is that kind of indicative of the tight end's is not as valuable in the NFL, and it's still valuable, but not as NFL teams not putting a premium on potentially taking a tight end in the top 10. So just a few questions I have with Brock Bowers not being projected to go top 5, because like is Brock Bowers a top 5 player in this draft? Yes. Like, honestly, I think the top 5 players, Caleb Williams is the best player, Marvin Harrison 2, Malik Nabers 3, Romo Dunze 4, Brock Bowers 5. I think those are the 5 best players in this draft. Some maybe would argue Romo Dunze. Maybe some would even argue Malik Nabers, but Malik Nabers is just he just has a skill set where even if he's not an elite, even if he never becomes an elite wide receiver, he's a guy that's just going to put pressure on opposing defenses, just because like the way he gets off the line of scrimmage, his burst, run after the catch, the contact balance too after the catch. There's just so many good attributes to Malik Nabers' game that I feel like even if he doesn't become an all-around elite receiver, like if he's not, a couple years from now, if he's not discussed as a top 3, top 5 receiver, I think a lot of people he'll still have a career where he's viewed as a, maybe in that second tier of wide receivers, and he still puts a lot of pressure on defenses week in and week out, and he has, maybe 2, or maybe he has like 3-4 really dominant games a year where he has like 100 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns, and just, has a couple of really big chunk plays. So I think that's a very reasonable expectation for Malik Nabers' career, that he could be at least in that second tier of wide receivers. Now, obviously, could he be in that? I don't think it's far-fetched that he could be one of the top 1, 2, 3 receivers in the NFL in a couple of years, but I think to say he'll be in that, at least that strong tier or second tier wide receivers, I think is certainly reasonable expectations for Malik Nabers. But yeah, we're just about out of time, guys. I'm going to wrap with that. Thanks for tuning into the Brand Partial Show. Stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show. Till next time, peace.